Today, we're going to be talking about nurturing child and parent development. This is going to have an emphasis on social emotional development. And we're so excited to tell you about our repeat presenter, Dr. Pradeep Gadwani. If you've ever attended a Dr. Pradeep Gadwani talk before, you better drop an emoji for me today, because if not, you're in for a treat. We're so excited about it. What can I say? A little summary. Dr. Pradeep Gadwani is a pediatrician and a community health leader who works at American Academy of Pediatrics, California Chapter 3, San Diego, and Imperial counties, on a team that provides countywide coordination and support for two large-scale community initiatives, Healthy Development Services and First Step Home Visiting, funded by First 5 San Diego. Dr. Gadwani is a medical director for AAP Chapter 3, ACEs Aware Work. Over the last 18 years, these community-wide programs have reached over 334,000 children and their families. Dr. Gadwani is a past president of AAP Chapter 3 and a member of the board governors at the San Diego Foundation, and serves on various community and national advisory boards. His areas of expertise include child development, infant and early childhood mental health, childhood trauma, parents' perception of childhood behaviors, and cultural issues in healthcare. So with that, Dr. Gadwani, we are so grateful to have you back. We're so excited for today. Take it away.
Welcome, everybody. I know that it's Veterans Day for many, and I know some of you are joining us from outside of California. I'm going to be making reference to services that are available in California. However, many of these services are available where you are as well. And so I think we have a smaller group today. So again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We can also stop just to take questions along the way. There's a lot of material, and I really do enjoy things being interactive. That said, like I mentioned, there is a lot of material. So just to let you know that my inspiration is a pediatrician named Barry Brazelton. I hope many of you have seen his book called Touch Points. If you haven't, it's still very relevant today. He wrote this back a while ago, and he was really just a very kind man who was a pediatrician who said, I'd like for parents to learn that they can understand their baby by watching the baby's behavior. And that's a big theme in the work that we'll be doing today, is really thinking about behavior as a language. And so we're going to see things about development, but really looking at children's behavior as its own language. And so Dr. Brazelton talked about touch points, which are predictable periods where you kind of maybe lose a little bit of your milestones, you get a little disorganized, and then kids have this kind of explosive growth in their development. And it's this back and forth. You move a little bit forward, you move a little bit backwards. It's not a straight line. It's not 1, 2, 3. It kind of moves at its own pace of each kid. And anytime a kid moves backwards in their developmental milestones, parents get a little bit thrown off. And so Dr. Brazelton was just a really wonderful man who really wanted parents to have that understanding. So one of the things is I would like to actually start a field of study called nurturology, the study of nurture. And nurture just simply means to care for and encourage the growth or development of. And it doesn't matter what you put in here. For me, of course, it's children and parents, but it can also be of pets, plants. Nurture is really very fundamental in who we are. And in the context of the work that we're talking about today, it occurs when a parent or caregiver is available and able to sensitively respond to and meet their child's needs. We'll talk a lot about attachment later on, but this is a really foundational and fundamental aspect of our development as human beings. So again, thinking about this is we want parents and caregivers to be available, tuned, and interested in their kids. And it really is quite remarkable what that does for the growth of kids. And I like to say that nurturing relationships are love in action. You can see this father and his daughter, and you can actually just almost see the love between them. And you can just see how she's so, just they're looking into each other's faces, and there's just great connection. And the important part is nurturing relationships really do build better brains, healthy attachment, social emotional intelligence, which we know is so important, self-regulation, and we'll talk about self-regulation and the piece that helps that, which is called co-regulation, and resiliency. I just want to say with resiliency, there's a lot of stuff out there that people are resilient or not resilient, but the truth of the matter is we really, when we're when we're distressed, there's someone who helps us. And that's how resiliency is really built. It's really built in the context of relationships. It's not some magical quality you have or you don't have. It's something we develop. And everyone has the opportunity to develop this. And our relationships are so critical when it comes to developing resiliency. And then also just thinking about nurturing relationships are really inborn. You can see these two little ones in the NICU that are twins, and they have their arm around each other, basically saying, yeah, you can do this. And so there's something incredibly important about nurture. My next slide's a bit busy. So really all it's saying in the green is that our environment, which includes not only the physical environment, but our social environment, um, connects with our development biologically, and then that intersects with our development. And really these things work in concert with one another. And so again, it's really important to look at what are the environments, particularly the social environments for children. And it really does have an impact on our biology. I do a whole talk on the impacts of nurture and trauma, which if you do search the internet with my name, with both my degrees, and you pop videos, there's a video out there on the internet that really goes over that, a whole different talk. I joke about that because there is a Pradeep Gidwani MD, but he's the managing director of Foster Beer in India. So he does not have anything about child development. So the next one is something I think you all know doing the work that you do, that children are in the middle of family, community, and society. And those things all are the context that children live in. And so again, so important to think about the culture of each family and how they see what's successful for themselves and their children. And I think the important part is, and this is why I talk about parent development, right? So if we can focus on the adults who care for children, we can really have the breakthrough events. And you'll see some of my slides coming up about how important the earliest years are for children. And so this is a citation from the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard. It's a really great place with great resources, great videos, great material. So if you're interested, there's a lot more information there. Likewise, as Jessica mentioned, and one of the things that's lovely that Caltrin does on a regular basis is provide training on the protective factors, which comes from the Strengthening Families framework. And this is an organization, the Center for the Study of Social Policy, that really said, we know there's things that make a big difference for parents, and you don't have to have a separate program to do it. Let's build these things into programs. And so the 5 buckets that they have identified are parent resilience, social connections, knowledge of parenting and child development, which is what we'll talk about today, concrete supports in times of needs, and the social emotional competency of children. So you can see that these pieces are so important. And again, I really urge you to, if you're not familiar with this, take a look at the Caltrain trainings. There's a lovely set of trainings. One is more if you like the lecture format like today is. Then there's another set that's a little bit more interactive and allows you to say, how do I put these things into practice? We have different styles of learning, and I love the fact that Caltrain offers trainings that really meet your needs and meet how you learn best. So let's dive a little deeper into this knowledge of parenting and child development. Um, I will admit some of my slides have a lot of information on it. I just want that there for you to have reference. I won't read through all of the slides, but I just want you to see and have this information at your fingertips. And a lot of today is me sharing some of the best tools that are out there that can help you as you're learning. And learning development is a constantly evolving process. We're always learning more and more. So for parents, we want them to seek and acquire and use accurate information about the ages and stages related information. We want parents' behaviors to lead to secure attachment, which we'll talk about, and the importance of parents being attuned, meaning being in sync with their children and emotionally available, being nurturing, responsive, and reliable, being regular, predictable, and having consistent routines. Bedtime and dinner time are big. Interactive language experiences, and we'll talk more about language, and providing a physically and emotionally safe environment for one's child, and providing opportunities for a child to explore and to learn by doing. And that is just also based on the attachment relationship. C is really important. The appropriate developmental expectations. Actually, one of the number 1 predictors for physical abuse is physical and emotional abuse, is parents having unrealistic developmental expectations. If you're expecting your 3-year-old to be doing something that they're supposed to be doing at 5, I can see how a parent can get frustrated. So again, for all of you working with families, I hope today gives you tools that you can use and also you can share with families. And that's really the piece that's really important. And positive discipline. Just want to say for discipline, the word discipline really comes from the word disciple, which means to teach. So we really need to make sure people understand that discipline is about teaching, not about punishment. And I think many of us grew up with punishment rather than discipline. So again, I think we can help reframe what we do for our kids to really help them learn and grow in a healthy way. The other part is recognizing and attending to the special needs of a child. Each child is so unique and different, and it becomes really important that we help parents understand the beauty of the fact that each child is so unique. Again, a little bit of a busy slide, so I don't want you to get too confused or too in the weeds with this one, but what I'm really showing is there are these critical aspects of when the brain develops. And what I really want to point out is the second and third bar from the top. Emotional control and habitual ways of responding. If you look, those critical periods start before the age of 1. So this is why it becomes so important that the earliest years of a child's life, we support not only the child, but the family. And I think as a society, we really can do a much better job of supporting young families, particularly when they first have a child, and really through those early years when children need so much attention to be nurtured and to grow. And that early work actually does impact not only your emotional well-being, but your physical well-being as well. So let's just go into the basics of development. Childhood development, it's a process every child goes through. It involves learning and mastering skills like sitting, walking, talking, skipping, and tying your shoes. Children learn these skills and they learn them in a predictable way, and they're called developmental milestones. And we'll be talking about how you can do your part to help monitor those developmental milestones. And when a child doesn't reach a milestone, then that's when we want to take a closer look. Traditionally, the domains of development are speech and language, gross motor, which is the large muscles, fine motor, which are the smaller muscles like fingers and hands, cognitive development, intellectual development, mental development, your ability to learn and solve problems. And then the one that has really gotten a lot more attention in the last, say, 10 to 20 years is social emotional development. And that's the child's ability to interact with others, including helping themselves and self-control. So this is really the traditional way of teaching development. And if we have time at the end, I'll share with you how I'm teaching development now. And hopefully we can have some changes in the way that we do this work. But let's go through again the classic pieces. So there are some terms in development that we use. We use surveillance, screening, and evaluation or assessment. And surveillance is just a system of regularly and routinely checking on a child's development. And that's everyone who interacts with kids, whether it's early care and education, daycare providers, whether it's parents, whether it's grandparents, whether it's the pediatrician. We should all be just checking on how is the child doing in their development. The reason being is as you'll see today, is that we can really do a lot to help a child in their early development. Screening is where we use a standardized way to identify a child who requires more help or closer observation, and connecting parents with resources. And we'll talk about a particular screening tool that we like called the Ages and Stages questionnaire. And evaluation, that's when a child does require some more help. And, it's a process of really defining their needs and creating a plan. And again, ideally, when you have a child that's a little bit behind in their development or even far behind in their development, you want to share that with everybody, the pediatrician, the where they are for daycare, where they are for preschool, where they are with grandparents, so we want everybody on the same page of how do we help kids? Because a lot of times what kids need is just some practice and exposure and some encouragement. So a developmental milestone is a skill acquired in a specific time frame, and it develops in a sequential fashion. So they really do happen in an order, and each milestone builds on the last milestone. And because children acquire the developmental milestones in a specific time frame or window, we can predict when most of those kids will learn those skills. So again, I've embedded some really great resources Healthychildren.org is my national organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics. This is well, actually, it's great. This website has stuff for both parents and for pediatricians, but the parent side of this is just wonderful information. So they have some stuff that's a little more general, that first one, but then the second one's a little bit more specific. So I'm going to be presenting some little snapshots of this work. There's so much information. I just want to point you to the material that I have found to be helpful and that I know is really high quality and accurate. I do have some friends who actually work at healthychildren.org, and they are wonderful pediatricians who are incredibly thoughtful. And so I do know that when you go to their website, you will enjoy the material that they have. And it is there is a lot of material. It's also why I want to point you in the right direction. What's really interesting is the Centers for Disease Control has gotten really involved in child development. And I myself asked the question, like, why are you doing this? Well, it turns out that their interest is in preventing child abuse and all the effects of child abuse. So very thoughtfully, they put together some great tools. They work in coordination with the American Academy of Pediatrics, but they have some really great child milestone checks that you can use on your phone. And they do have websites as well, but the app is just wonderful. And there's photos and videos that illustrate the milestones, and it makes it a lot easier. So again, I would encourage you to download these and to play with these. We'll talk a little bit about what's on them, but it's on Apple, it's on Android. Really, really wonderful materials. So let's talk about language delay. So it happens in 1 out of 10 kids. Many of the problems persist through school and adulthood. When you can't express what you need, it can create behavioral problems. And classes and enrichment work for most, and we want to try to get it as early as possible. If you go back to how the brain develops in the critical windows for language, this period between 2 and 3 years is really the critical time period. And so what are those language delays? Well, it can look like receptive delays, which means I'm not understanding. It can look like expressive. I can't say what I need. There's kids who are slow talkers. There are kids who are slow learners, and your cognitive abilities and your language abilities are very intertwined. And so when we look at them, what we want to start looking at is in that early time period, really at 6 months, you can see that a child responds to their own name. They use a wide range of sounds. A lot of it's like ba, ba, mama, da, da. So they're just playing around with sounds. They'll shake their head no, and they'll understand simple commands. When we get to 1 year to 18 months, they'll start using simple words, no being one of the favorites. Ask for food or drink with words, point to desired objects, point to correct pictures when asked, show me the doggy. And when we get to that 1.5 to 2 years, they'll follow simple directions. They'll use about 10 words. They can follow 2-part directions, and they can use 2-word sentences. Me do is one of the favorites. They enjoy singing and songs. I think all of you can remember a little one in your life who had a favorite song. I have a cousin whose daughter loved Baby Beluga, and so when she had children, I gave her that album, and she laughed and said, this was my favorite song. And I said, yes, I heard it with you 1,000 times. So again, they love a certain song, and they really kind of get hooked on it. And at 2 to 3, they're really starting to talk in 2 to 3 word sentences. They talk clearly to a stranger. So by 2, we should be able to understand half of what you're saying. And when I say we, it's someone who's a stranger. A lot of times parents can understand their kids, even when their language skills are a little behind, because they get a good sense of that. By 3, we really want we want a stranger to be able to understand 75%. And by 4, we want people to really be able to understand all of it. They can understand prepositions, in, on, under, besides. They can use pronouns like I, he, she, and you. They don't always use them correctly, but they do use them. Now, why is language so important? Well, one of the things we found was when we looked at kids of different ages, there was a study out that looked at kids, and this actually got to the New York Times. And so in professional families, they just used more words with their kids. And so kids actually had larger vocabularies by the age of 3. And as we look socioeconomically, there was less words the kids had. Now, I myself make my living by talking, so I think words are really important. I want everyone to have the opportunity to have whatever job best suits them and whatever really fulfills them. And the interesting part was when this study came out, we started sharing this information with low-income families, and like all families, they want the best for their kids. And so with just a little bit of coaching, they were all in. They wanted to do this. They just didn't know what they could do to help their kids. And once they knew that, like everybody else, they wanted to help their kids. So it's really wonderful to see that this information can be really useful. Now, those of you in California, First Five California and our local First Five really do a great job of getting the message out to the community about talk, read, and sing. And again, when we talk about this, the early literacy component, you don't have to be able to read to be able to help tell your kids stories, use pictures. So just keep that in mind, okay? Now, the other piece around language I want to share with you is this idea of parent ease. And parent ease is just that language. It's that fully grammatical speech that involves real words, elongated vowels, an exaggerated tone, and spoke directly to the child. It sounds happy and engaging, and it helps infants tune into socially to their parents and respond, even if it's only babble. So you guys know that sound, like, oh, you just do this thing and you narrate what's going on. And parents surveyed estimated that 18% that children at 18 months, their vocabulary when they were coached to use parentese was much higher, even at 18 months, than parents that weren't coached to do this. So again, the idea of, for some of us, it's like, oh, it sounds kind of silly. You're doing this baby talk. It's not baby talk. It really is parentese. And so you're really using that full tone, but you're exaggerating things, and there's a happiness to it. There's a joyfulness to it. I joke now that my kids are much older. I do this with the dog, but she is cute, and so you kind of get used to doing that in a fun way. So again, that actually does help, and it's kind of funny because we do that kind of innately, but also when you can coach parents and teach them, it really does expand a child's language. So again, one of the things that's important is parent education. And so, again, this piece of really talking to parents about this language stuff, right? And the parentese. But one of the things that's really important is helping parents understand they need to be face-to-face with their child. They have to go back and forth. That actually makes changes in the brain and respond based on what the baby's doing. So it's really kind of learning how to read their cues. And we'll talk more about that later. And there's this idea of shared attention. You have to have both of you looking at the ball to teach the child the word ball. So again, these are things that are very innate in that when you're tuned into kids that you do, but not all parents have had that. So we need to help parents. So also using social cues as pointing and eye gaze to communicate with young kids before they can speak. I know I've talked to parents and they're like, oh, they're just a baby. And I'm like, yeah, but they're listening to you. And it's quite amazing, that back and forth relationship. The other part that's really important is play. I know for a lot of our families, they did not grow up playing. Their parents might not have had time, but play is the work of kids, and it really does help in all of development. And particularly when a child can direct their play. In fact, this idea of child-directed play helps kids develop autonomy and their own sense of self. And I think this is one of the reasons we have some issues around mental health is we're not letting kids early on develop that sense of who they are. And again, like everything else, all of this parent-child interaction has to really be adjusted to an individual child's temperament. We'll talk a little bit about that more later. Their ability and the needs of children. The other really big thing that we need to help parents with is caregiver support and stress reduction. Okay. So I'm going to go to this next slide, but I want to pause for just a second and just see if there's any questions, because I know that was a lot of information. So just let me just take a second, Jess, to see if there are any questions or anybody who wants to share something. I
Sure.
don't want to talk the whole time.
Yeah, so I don't see any questions in the Q&A. So as a reminder, there is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you select that, you're welcome to drop your questions in there or into the chat.
Okay. So, and again, I know this is a lot of information, and I hope as we get to certain sections, you'll stop me to ask for further clarification, more detail. So, the big thing is why do I do this talk, and why do I work so hard in San Diego to get people to screen? Is we catch problems earlier. It allows for early treatment. It's effective and efficient. It's when the child's brain is most able to change. As I mentioned earlier, there's critical periods of rapid growth in the brain and the body. And unfortunately, most kids who would benefit from early intervention aren't identified until they start school. So we really want to work with everybody to get kids screened early. And so things like developmental delays, learning disorders, behavior and social emotional problems affect about 1 out of 6 kids. And only 20 to 30% of those kids are identified before school. And we can make changes later, but it's just a lot harder. So the other thing is that, from an economics perspective, it really does make a lot of sense. Early treatment leads to increased graduation from high school, the ability to hold a job, live independently, decreases teen pregnancy, decreases delinquency and violent crime. And they say early treatment really could save $30,000 to $100,000 per child. So that's why it's so important. So at the American Academy of Pediatrics, we recommend regular screening at the well child visit at 9 months, 18 months, and 30 months. We also recommend for autism screenings at 18 months and 24 months. Now, the interesting part about this is we are seeing in pediatrics currently, families are not coming back to well child visits after COVID like we had before. So this is something we're working on collectively. And there's just a visual of that same thing of what we have here in San Diego. So we have services for kids, and we'll talk about those services as we go. So an example of a screening tool is something called the Ages and Stages Questionnaire. So its third version. There's 19 unique questionnaires that are designed to be completed by parents or primary caregivers. And they're intervals of the different months. So you can see 4 months to 60 months. And each questionnaire creates 30 developmental items. And they talk about those, the ones that we talked about earlier: communication, gross motor, fine motor, problem solving, and personal social, which is that kind of stuff that the social emotional stuff, like taking care of yourself, and more of that personal piece. Like, can you button, can you dress, those kinds of things. The Ages and Stages Questionnaire, social emotional, is for the social emotional development, which is a little bit more complex. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So just the basics, the developmental domains and the overall sections address general parent concerns. The reading level is from 4th to 6th grade. There are illustrations that are provided when possible. And parents can check yes, sometimes, or not yet. It's not no, it's just not yet. And then the program staff converts the score to point values. Then we look at those values and compare those scores to different cutoffs to decide, do they need more that next level of an assessment. And so Easter Steels, the organization, actually is so committed to this that they have the Ages and Stages Questionnaire that you can fill out for your child for free. So the CDC has that developmental milestones, but if you want more details, here's some links for that. And I just checked those last night just to make sure that it's still working, and they are. Oh, Jessica's got her hand up. Great.
We have a question,
Great.
as I wanted to read out for you, please. Is there a specific age of the child that as parents, we should refrain from using a childlike or baby tone of voice? So there's a more specific question. More specifically, if a 10 or 12-year-old is using a baby tone persistently, should the parent respond in the same type of voice? Is it beneficial as a parent to encourage the older child to use a big kid voice?
Yeah, great question. So what I would say is when you said older, I was like, oh, 3 or 4 or 5. No, 12. I think it's really important to respond back to the child in an adult voice for yourself. And I think it's interesting to gently find out, why are they using that little kid voice? What is that about, right? So I think it becomes important to not so much tell kids what to do or to force them in a certain way, but to find out, why are they using that baby voice? When are they using it? Are they feeling uncomfortable? Are they feeling like they need to be comforted? So, for example, my youngest is now 23, but even at 15, there was times that he would just come and crawl into bed with his mom and snuggle with her. And I told her, hey, when your 15-year-old son, who was really a bit grouchy on a general basis, does that, you need to meet him where she's at. And she, of course, loved it, right? But there's nothing wrong with that. That was those times that he needed emotional comfort. So I think it's really important to kind of explore what's going on. So again, it's not a good or bad or a right or wrong. It's what's behind the behavior and trying to understand that behavior and to consider what is your child's needs, right? So I know for some kids, they go into that baby voice when they're feeling unsafe or they're feeling overwhelmed. And so they might just need some reassuring. And we'll talk about this later, but the first thing that we always have to do with children is have them feel safe and connected. Then we can figure out what's going on, and then how can we help them? How can we help them grow, right? So again, you really want to look at what is the context, like what else is going on. I hope that's helpful. Can you give me a thumbs up if it's helpful? Oh, perfect. Okay. Even better. Claps on that. Okay. Love it. Thank you. And this is really what I want you to be able to do is I built some extra time in here for questions at the end, but if you have a question and you want it answered, let's try to do it right away, because then it allows us to pay more attention to what's going on. Because again, if you have something that's of concern, it's great for us to touch base about that. So the next piece of this is the ASQ SE, the social emotional one, and it's designed to exclusively screen for social emotional behaviors. It, as I mentioned, the ASQ3 includes personal social, which is, again, can they meet their own needs, like helping get dressed, knowing her name and other names. But in contrast, the ASQ2 really is a broad, complex tool, and it really includes 7 key behavioral areas, which are self-regulation, compliance, social emotional communication, um, adaptive function, autonomy, affect, interaction with people. I don't want you to get too bogged down with that, just to say there's really good science behind it. And, as we saw earlier, the ASQ had a lot more intervals. This is a little bit more spaced out. But again, going from 2 months all the way to 60 months. And again, there are 30 questions. There's a raw score with cutoffs. And again, we can look at that. Now, I'll be honest with you, we use this tool quite a bit, and we'll see sometimes that kids are way off the scale. And then there's other times where they may not be off the scale, but the parents have a concern. So again, the tools are useful, but they're not used by themselves. They're used in the context of what families need. And again, the basics, reading levels, 4th to 6th grade, illustrations are provided. Same set of scales, yes, sometimes, not yet. And then there's the converting these to point values. Now, this one's a little more tricky because the way you phrase the question, sometimes you need to score from one side or the other, but that's a lot more detail than we'll talk about today. But it's just a very, very, very good tool. Okay. So, the important part is always with this is to meet families where where they are. And so you have to make sure that your communication really is at the family's level of readiness to hear and act on the information. We've had a lot of families, when they first hear things about their kids being behind, they really have a very strong reaction. And we just make sure that they understand that we're here, and when they're ready, we're ready to help them, right? Also, emotional state, education level, cultural beliefs, family resources, the ability to use the system. You just need to make sure that when we are working with families, we're really meeting where they're at. And actually, the work that I do in Healthy Development Services and our home visiting program, First Steps, we spend a lot of time around this and building relationships with families, and really helping our providers see the family for who they are, not as a patient or a client, but as real human beings who have a lot going on and want the best for their kids. And we really work to partner. So what's early intervention? That's a term that gets used a lot. It's a term used to describe the services and supports for babies and toddlers from birth to 3 in most states and territories for kids with developmental delays and disabilities. and their families. It may include speech therapy, physical therapy, other types of services based on the child's need and family's background. It can have a significant ability on kids' ability to learn, and increases their success at school and life. And the programs are available in all the states. These are federally mandated. And these services are provided for free or reduced cost for families who meet those criteria. So when you go to the doctor's office, we want you to have this kind of language. And when I say you, if you're working with families, we want to have families be able to say things like when they go to the doctor's, they say, I'd like to make an appointment to see the doctor because I'm concerned about my child's development. And then be ready to share your specific concern and write down notes. I always tell people, I'm a doctor. I write down notes before I go to the doctor. I write down notes at the doctor. It's hard to remember everything, and it can be very helpful. And you'll see a repeated theme about writing down, documenting, asking, making sure you have that information so you can refer back. It's hard for us to remember some of these pieces. Now, I mentioned that there's these programs such as Early Start, which in California is called Regional Center, the school systems. Then there's Regional Center that also there are 7 conditions such as autism, intellectual disabilities, where they will take care of kids their whole lives. Then in California, we have the higher end kids, that's California Children's Services, and we'll talk about that in a second, and then exceptional family resources. So for most families, this is really for the kids on the higher end, about 1 to 2% of the population, depending on the state. States like Massachusetts serve more, Connecticut. So each state is different, but families do need help navigating. So Early Start or Regional Center is for most kids up to 2 years and 11 months. Usually by 2 years, 6 months, we start thinking about the schools. It's parent referral with a disability or some risk factors. It assesses all areas of development. They provide speech development, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and some mental health. And it's part of the IDA Part C Act, and that's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So you can get more information here. And again, I know many of you are from outside of California, so we need to look at what's available in your state in particular. When you call the office, you want to say, I'm concerned about my child's development and would like to request an evaluation. Can you help me or let me speak with someone who can? Here in San Diego, our regional center does a really good job of supporting families. And so they have specialists that will work with you. So again, it's really important to be ready to share your specific concern. They're going to ask you some of your general information. And again, write down who you spoke with, the date, what you said, because you might need this information later. Everyone's doing their best, but again, our systems are often very overloaded. Likewise, when kids are over 3, school districts come in and play an important role, and they take all ages. So you don't have to be school age. They'll treat deaf and blind kids under 3 because there's special carve-outs for that. Otherwise, 3 to 5 with a parent referral, and there have to be more than one area of concern. And they'll assess only in the area that you say that you're concerned about. So that's why it's so important to say that. And unfortunately, treatment varies from district to district. In San Diego County, we have 43 school districts. So it makes it really challenging for us. And again, this is part of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and this is called IDA Part B. And again, it's going to sound very similar about when you call your local elementary school or school board, you really want to say, I'm concerned about my child's development. I'd like to talk to somebody about having my child evaluate. Can you help me or let me speak to someone who can? This one, you really have to share your specific concern. And if you need coaching on that, your pediatrician could be very helpful. And again, write down who you spoke with, the date, the time. And again, it's just important to document things because it's just hard to remember all these details. So it's just become so much better to do it with helping yourself out with notes. In California, and I do know this is in many states as well, we have what's known as California Children's Services. Now, this is different. These are specific diagnoses like cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, Down syndrome. And this is so families don't go bankrupt, right? So this is for those kids that have really high medical needs, and it provides diagnostic and treatment services, medical case management, physical and occupational therapy for kids under 21. It does require physician's referral, and there's a sliding scale for the payments, and here's a link for it. And so again, while we're talking about development, I want to make sure that you all have these resources for those families that have kids that are medically complicated and complex. Insurance will only go so far, and it really becomes important that we support families when their kids have these higher needs. And then there's the exceptional family resource centers, and that's peer-to-peer support here in San Diego. EFRC does the intake for the regional center, and they can be really helpful. But here are the resources that you can use throughout the state. And in California, we have what's known as First Five. It's a tax on cigarettes that the money is earmarked for programs for kids 0 to 5. And they really are trying to create a network through a setup called Help Me Grow. It's not in every county, but it's in many counties. Actually, in San Diego, we don't have that because of the program I run. We do similar things in healthy development services, but we actually do the treatment. But Help Me Grow is a great resource throughout the state. And they educate and train local medical providers and early care educators. And they also provide tools and resources and screening, and they collect data around the developmental screening. So again, another really good resource in the state of California is First Five, and the various counties have Help Me Grow. Now, while you wait, unfortunately, families have to wait many times for weeks, months before they're able to get an appointment and see a specialist. It can be very frustrating for parents who want an answer and need help now. If you find yourself in this situation, know that there's some simple things you can do, that help their development. So what can you do? You can first off support parents in their role as caregivers, show them examples of how to create secure attachment, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Help them foster play as an opportunity to learn and think and solve problems, using the screening as an educational tool. So again, the screening tools really become helpful in giving parents the right language to advocate for their kids, and also helping them to show that what they do with their kids can make a big difference, and help families put developmental activities into their daily routines. So it's interesting, with all of these things that I've talked about, the ages and stages questionnaires, you can actually go online and just put ages and stages questionnaire, 18 months activity list. And there's a beautiful set of resources that have the actual activities for each particular age that helps families. So let's go with one more slide. So I always joke that I just call them the no-nos for parents. Don't compare other children or other siblings. Don't blame. Don't give labels. I have a lot of friends who are in the education world who love to say this kid has ADHD, and I always say, are you sure? Are you sure it's not early trauma? Are you sure that it's not the fact that the kid isn't getting outside and exercising? The other part is don't assume treatment is too expensive. And one of the things that we struggle with pediatricians is to help them say, don't wait and see if they'll outgrow it. There are activities and things that we can do that can really make a difference today. So before we go into the social emotional development component of this talk, I'm going to ask Jess, is this a good time to take a break?
I think this is a great time to take a break, always at the top of the hour. How long would you like to break for?
I always am somewhere between 3 and 5. So you tell me.
All right. Why don't we meet in the middle and say 4?
Perfect.
All right.
It's almost like we planned it. All right, great. Well, welcome back, everybody. We're going to jump into the second half of this, which we're really going to focus on the social emotional development. And it's an interesting area. I have to be honest, this is one of my favorite areas of development. It just is such an interesting aspect of who we are and where it starts. And so, again, I always end up having enough content so that we can stop and talk. And then I have a little additional content at the end that I hope that we can get to that really kind of is the direction that I'm going in my own work. So we're going to go over social emotional development, and this really includes a child's experiences, expressions, and management of emotions, and the ability to establish positive and rewarding relationships with others. It includes the ability to identify and understand one's own feelings, to be able to read and comprehend the emotional states of others, to be able to manage strong emotions in a constructive way, to regulate one's own behavior and um, and to develop empathy for others. So that information that I just read is here. And again, there's a lot of information on here, and I don't want you to get too bogged down on it. I do want you to just see that there's so much that goes on as we're learning how to interact with one another and how to understand our own emotions. And again, as I mentioned earlier, this is what we're trying to do to make ourselves a better society, right? With the ability to understand our own emotions and how our emotions and our interactions play a significant role in our lives. And relationships are so critical to everything we do. So again, I'm going to come back to this whole thing with infants. It's really interesting because infants do experience and express and perceive emotion. This is not something that when I started my training that we really thought a lot about. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these little pieces just because, again, it's a lot of detail. But really what it comes down to is everything that's happening about learning to understand your emotions is in the context of relationships. So it means relationships with parents, with other kids, teachers, folks in the communities are really, really important. And it's interesting that newborns really prefer human faces over screens and other things. They respond to their mother's voices. And really that piece of meeting their child's needs and helping them to calm themselves down is really important for them to develop that skill on their own. So that's what these really say. And it really comes back to the idea of learning and emotions are interrelated. And again, you'll keep hearing me say that for our kids to be nurtured, to grow and to learn, they just need that emotional environment that supports them. So again, for resources around social emotional, one of my favorites is an organization called 0 to 3. And again, 0 to 3 has a lot of information, but this it helps you look at early development and social emotional development and resources around developing social emotional skills. Also, there's a place out of Vanderbilt called the Center for Social Emotional Development in Early Learning. And these are just great resources that are there, and they're constantly um, updating those resources. And 0 to 3 is a really important organization that's really done a great job of motivating us to understand these early years in life. So this next picture is something that I think we can all relate to, is when we're distressed, we all need someone to respond to us. Now I have parents with their kids, except that little one in the middle, and you can see she's reaching out to somebody. So there is somebody that she knows will comfort her. But you can see that, we take it to the toddlers and these two moms with their toddlers and father with his little one. But you look at these pictures and you realize that that's not only true for little ones. It's true for all kids. Teenagers especially are going through a lot of brain growth. And it's for each of us. We'll talk about it a little bit more later, but when something good happens, we look for someone to share it with. When something bad happens, we look for someone to share it with. It's part of who we are as human beings. So it's interesting, the word emotional regulation. I joke with many of my staff members that, normal people don't use the word regulation. It's a big fancy word, and we'll talk about what it really means. But again, babies and young children really are looking at your reaction as parents and caregivers, and they ask for comfort. Is a big part of it. So as we talked about the example of an older kid who might be using a baby voice, they might be looking for emotional comfort, and parents can help babies and children learn to soothe themselves. Parents model how emotions are identified and coped with. So again, helping parents learn this and parents developing those skills and being able to talk about these things is really important. Excuse me. So the range of emotions and the nature of infants' emotions and reactions, the range of emotion of what's permitted at the home, the range of emotions a family tends towards, and parenting style and temperament. These all really start helping children figure out how to work with their emotions. I have a funny story of a couple of friends of mine, a guy that I grew up with. He's a extremely well-known cardiologist, and his wife's a really well-known cardiologist. They're very high-achieving people, but their family, they're yellers. They yell. They're very excitable, and I'm a little bit more mellow, so I always have to remind myself their yelling is just how they go through the world. So it's pretty funny because again, it's just not what I would expect. And I remember I was sharing that story with my mother, and she said, "Yeah, but his dad was a yeller too." And so it's really interesting how families have a particular temperament or style that they go through the world. So, what are some of the problems we see? Um, in infancy, we can see kids that are difficult to soothe, that are irritable. They might have lower activity levels, or they may have developmental delay. So we can see some of these emotional issues early. By 3, we can see some acting out, aggressiveness, lack of compliance, withdrawal, stories that are guilty, stories, um, some kids are a little bit less inhibited with unusual circumstances. We start wondering what's going on with that child, and also difficulty developing secure relationships with friends and other adults. So those are things that we look for in this area of emotional regulation. Now, I mentioned earlier this component about we look for someone to connect with when something good happens or something bad happens. So just think about that for a minute. It's a very natural piece to want to call somebody or like look at the person next to you and go, "Did you just see that?" And so part of this is how we look about the responses to stress, right? So traditionally, when we talk about stress management, stress biology, we talk about fight or flight. When you feel threatened, you get activated and you want to go. There's another component on one side where we freeze, where the response to stress is to just freeze. So again, most of the stuff that we do is around that negative piece. But what's really interesting is there's a positive piece to stress, right? We all need some stress when we're learning something new. Think about when you were learning how to drive a car. It was stressful, but that stress, in a positive amount of stress, helps you be heightened to learn something new. If you get too much of it, it doesn't get turned off. Then we start getting into problems. But my important theme here is one of the ways that we deal with stress is connecting with others. And on this slide it says affiliate on the one corner, and there's some biochemistry that happens. There's oxytocin, one of the chemicals. There are other really good chemicals that happen. So think about a moment when you were with a young child who was distressed and you help calm that child down. When the child calms down, the child feels better, but you also feel better. And there's a biochemical reaction happening in your body. And that's kind of this whole piece about how important relationships are. We're biologically wired for relationships. That's why this whole social emotional stuff is so important. Now, I've thrown the term out temperament a few times, and I think it's really important to kind of say what temperament is. Temperament is our innate way of how we respond to the world, and there's a biological basis for it. So there's a lot of study in the early part of life. And when folks studied temperament, they really found these different levels of activity level, the ability to persist at a task, distractibility, your initial reaction, your adaptability, your mood intensity, sensitivity, the need for regularity, and sensory thresholds. So there are scales for temperament. And in the work that we do, we help parents look at their temperament and their child's temperament. Sometimes their temperament matches, sometimes it mismatches. But it becomes really important to understand that that's how your child is, not that there's something wrong. I gave you that example of my friend who's a yeller. That's a house where the mood intensity is high. They're used to it. The kids are like that. And so it's really interesting to see how they're matched, and they'll get elevated, but everybody's good with it. My family's a lot more even keel. So it's just interesting how these innate ways of how we deal with the world, which is really based on the biology we're born with, can really have a big impact. And as we talked with parents about temperament, they'll go, "Oh, so my child isn't doing that on purpose." And the answer is no, your child is not doing that on purpose. It's just kind of how they're wired. We definitely have seen some babies who really have a difficult time soothing. Like I said earlier, they just can't calm down. And that can be really hard as a parent. And again, it's just part of how their biology is. Now, I've mentioned a bunch of times this term attachment, and it is really important to all the work that I do these days. And I just think it's really critical in so much of what we do. And this work comes from a pediatrician named John Bowlby and a psychologist, Mary Ainsworth. And what they really noticed was in early childhood, as our needs are met, it shapes our view of the world, and most importantly, our capacity to form and maintain healthy emotional relationships. It's that enduring bond with a special person, the sense of security and safety within the context of a relationship includes soothing, comfort, and pleasure. There's a loss or threat of that special person really results in a great deal of distress for a child. And it's just interesting, a little side note, John Bowlby was born during World War II, and for the safety, the children were moved away from their parents. So he was separated from his parents. And then in England, they use a lot of boarding schools. So it's kind of interesting. His own experiences led him to study this area, and his insights have been incredibly important. So again, just visually, when we think about bonding and attachment, bonding is that feeling that parents have with their child, and can start as early as conception. But attachment is the quality of the relationship between an infant and a child and her caregiver that develops over time. And again, it has a lot to do with the meeting of needs, that sense of safety and comfort, really critical. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but let's talk about how it develops. So, when we're kind of in that pre-attachment, like that 0 to 3 months, they'll accept care from anybody. Many behaviors are reflexes. Most often they can be soothed by anybody. By 3 to 6 months, they'll smile. But again, they're going to be more as time goes. That special bond develops, and in that first year of life, they remember the caregiver. They're shy with others. They're upset when they're separated from their caregiver. They show happiness when the caregiver returns, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But then again, by 2 to 3, you're starting to see that they can understand and handle separation. They can explore more independently. And by 3 years to 5 years, they really start looking at family values, and friendships become important. They move a little bit away from their parents and become more independent, and less physical contact is required. So it's very interesting. So I'm going to go back to the two individuals that I mentioned. John Bowlby was the first one who talked about attachment, but Mary Ainsworth added a lot to our understanding of attachment. She did something called the strange situation. And so this would happen where you come in with a caregiver, the child would be separated, you see how the child responded. And she noticed 4 different patterns. So there was a secure attachment, and what happens is the caregiver reacts quickly and positively to a child's need. And so the child is distressed when the caregiver leaves, but is happy when the caregiver comes back and seeks comfort. So that's the secure attachment. There are 3 types of insecure attachment. There was an avoidant, where when the caregiver was unresponsive or dismissive or uncaring, the child wouldn't have distress when the caregiver left, and didn't acknowledge the caregiver when they came back, and did not seek to make contact with the caregiver. So again, where the parent was unresponsive, this was how the child ended up acting. There's the insecure ambivalent that she identified, and the parent in that situation responds to the child inconsistently. So the child would be distressed when the parent left, but wasn't comforted by the return, because again, they didn't know what was going to happen. And then there's a very, very small percentage where the caregiver's behavior is abusive or neglectful or frightening, and then the child doesn't have any attaching behaviors, and often looks a little dazed, confused, and apprehensive around the caregiver, which is, again, makes sense. But we're talking about early in life. But what does this look like in action? Like we said, the secure attachment, there's healthy communication. They can ask for help. They can take care of their emotions. The anxious attachment, you see some clinginess, fear of abandonment, needs that constant reassurance. The avoidant style is difficult expressing themselves. They tend to be withdrawn from others and they're unwilling to ask for help. And then the disorganized incorporates the components of the other ones, um, where there's low self-worth. And again, these things really attachment impacts our lifelong learning, right? Our lifelong relationship, sorry. So when you look at that, that's a really critical aspect. And you can see in these pictures, these are just, those pictures that kind of show us healthy relationships, and what happens early in life stays with us. So when we look in adults, what do we look like? The adult who's securely attached is confident. Their relationships are two-way. They're not reactive. They're resilient. The anxious, preoccupied person can be emotionally hungry. They have a fantasy of what the bond is like. There's a lack of nurturing. There's some turbulence. The dismissive avoidant it's a little bit more isolating, ambiguous, and is emotionally distant. And then there's a version's fearful avoidant, where they're really internally conflicted and it's unpredictable. So when you're talking with adults, you might hear them say things like, I find it easy to get close to people. I'm comfortable depending on people and having them depend on me. I don't worry about being abandoned or somebody getting too close to me. Someone who's anxious says, I find that others are reluctant to get as close to me as I would like. I often worry my partner doesn't love me or doesn't want to stay with me. I want to merge completely with the other person, and this desire scares people away. And avoidant, I'm somewhat uncomfortable being close to others. I find it difficult to trust them completely, difficult to allow myself to depend on them. I'm nervous when anybody gets too close. And often partners want me to be more intimate than I feel comfortable with. Now, these are just examples. It's not like you're one category or another. There's these things that blend. But the important part is to understand our early childhood has a big effect on how we relate to people as adults. And our experiences after that early time period can change these things. And we can actually change these things with reflection therapy. But again, early on, it's really, really important. And one model of developing attachment that I really like is the circle of security model. And the circle of security is parents attending to their needs. So in attachment work, there's two things that we see with kids in their behavior. On the top half of the circle, you see what's called secure base, which means the child feels comfortable going out to explore. So think about that with kids that you've been around. Those little ones that like they're with you and they go a little further and they look back to see that you're there. And then when they see that you're there, they're like more comfortable to explore. So the secure base allows kids to explore. That's on the top half. And then when kids get overwhelmed, they need a safe haven. And that's the bottom half. And that is really comes back. And these folks that developed Circle of Security, it's been around for about 30 years. They talk about, when your child is exploring, they want you to watch, they want you to be delighted, that sometimes you need to help them, sometimes you enjoy with them. And then when they're overwhelmed, they need you to protect them, comfort them, you to enjoy them in their distress, but really help them organize their feelings. And there's a phrase that I love in this model. And you'll see it on the next page, it's highlighted, is they say, always be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kinder. And when possible, follow your child's needs, and whenever needed, take charge. So it's not a, kind of just do everything for your child. It really is a beautiful model. And they often say that if you're more comfortable with one of those things of being bigger and stronger or being kinder and wiser, you have to help yourself develop the other one to meet your child's needs. And there's this beautiful book called Raising a Secure Child. And these gentlemen have been doing this work for a while. And I think it's incredibly wonderful work. And I highly recommend it. And it's interesting because their book is forwarded by a person I'm going to talk about next, which is Dan Siegel. And he is a child psychiatrist up in LA. And he talks about attunement. And attunement is when we attune with others, we allow our own internal state to shift. We come into resonance of the world, the inner world of another. So again, just thinking about that piece of when a child is distressed, we relax and we really try to feel what's going on for the child, right? And this resonance or this feeling what they feel helps create this sense of being felt, the feeling of being felt. Like, when someone's listening to you, they get you, right? You know that feeling. And children need this ability of feeling connected and with another person in a way that they feel like you get me to really help throughout their lives. So what does that look like in action? With your child, oops, with your child, it's really about knowing their feelings and their motivation, being able to look at your child's action and interpret the cues accurately. And again, we can all get better at this. We can all learn this. It's not automatic. It's something we can really build as a skill. And then we want to be able to meet their needs, their underlying emotional need. So there's a real beautiful piece of really looking at your child, looking at their behavior, wondering what are they feeling, wondering what they need, and then responding. So, for example, a caregiver sees a baby crying, recognizes the baby's hungry, then picks up the baby to comfort her and feed her. A mom comforting her toddler after he falls and skins his knee. We saw that earlier in those pictures. But we also see in adults when a friend says, "I'm fine," and she doesn't mean it, and you dig a little deeper and you find out what's going on. You can feel when that person says, "I'm fine," and they're not, right? You can get that sense. So when we do this work around attachment and attunement, um, a lot of parents feel like, "Oh my God, I gotta be attached. I gotta do it all the time." And the answer is no, you don't. Donald Winnicott, who again is a British psychiatrist and pediatrician, really did a great job of observing kids. And he talked about this idea that when we're with our kids, there's rupture and repair, meaning we are connected to our kids, but not all the time. And that's actually important because it helps kids become individuals. And when we become aware of that disconnect, we repair it by connecting, being warm, caring about their feelings, accepting, playful, and curious. And he really said that it's not the rupture that matters, it's the repair. And I think this is true not only for our relationship with children, but with our partners, with our older children, with our colleagues. You can disagree, and the disagreement isn't where we need to stop. We need to find a way to reconnect. And so Winnicott used this term called good enough parenting. And really, if we're attuned to our kids 40% of the time, that's enough. And the fact that we're not attuned to them all the time helps them develop their independence. And really what he was trying to get at is there's flexibility and room for real mistakes and limitations to our parenting abilities. And we just need to be a little bit kinder to ourselves as parents and to be able to say, I'm meeting my child's needs in the big ways. And that relationship is really the most important part, that connection. So again, going back to the milestones, when they're little, under 6 months, we're looking for a social smile. We're looking for that ability to distinguish their mom from others. They smile, they coo, they'll pat their own image in a mirror. In 6 months to a year, they'll reach for familiar people. They'll play peekaboo and patty cake. They'll push away unwanted things. They'll drop things when requested. At 1 year to a year and a half, we want to see them being able to give kisses and hugs. They'll hold a stuffed animal or a doll. They'll greet with a hi. They come to a parent for help. They get your attention by pulling on your hands or your clothes. I think that doesn't stop at 18 months, but we want to see them doing it. And then 18 months, the most famous thing, they say no. And that becomes one of their favorite words. They'll usually respond to being corrected. They show sympathy for other children. They'll feed, dress, and rock a doll or a stuffed animal. And they're really starting to develop a sense of self. And then by 2 to 3, they'll start playing with other kids. Before that, they kind of play next to each other. They'll help with simple tasks. They'll play pretend games as a mom, a teacher, firefighter, superhero. And they become frustrated because they're still trying to learn. Right? So those are the milestones that we're looking for in this area of social skills. Now, one of the things that's common, and unfortunately more common, in fact, this number is out of date. I got to change that. Autism spectrum disorder is a developmental disability caused by differences in the brain. And people with ASD may behave and communicate and interact and learn in ways that are different than other people. It's now closer to, I think, 1 in 20 kids. And there's a spectrum of what it looks like. So we have kids that really don't function well, and we have kids that function very well, but their social interactions are a little different. And early intervention is really critical. And as I mentioned earlier, we screen at 18 months and 14 months. And again, I'm going to give some examples, but the problem with autism is it's not always the same in every kid. It's really a little bit, there's a wide variety of how it shows up. So we'll see delays in language skills. We'll see a loss of language skills. We'll see them not make eye contact. We'll see them have a sing-song robotic voice. They'll repeat things without understanding. They don't start or sustain conversations. And again, these are just some of the things we see and make us want to really kind of look a little more closely for the child. So other things are things like avoids or does not keep eye contact, doesn't respond to their name by 9 months, doesn't show facial expressions, doesn't play simple interactive games at 12 months, uses few or no gestures. So again, you can see we're starting to get better at understanding earlier. Doesn't share interest with others by 15 months, doesn't point to show you something at 18 months, doesn't notice when others are hurt or upset at 2 years, doesn't notice other children and join them in play by 3, doesn't pretend to be something else like a teacher or a superhero by 4, and doesn't sing or dance or act for you by 5, right? So these are things that we look at. Other things is sometimes they have restrictive, things where they'll line up toys or other objects, and they get upset when they're not in that order. They'll repeat words or phrases over and over again. They'll play with toys the same way every time. Is focused on parts of the object. And again, some of this you will see in normal kids as well. So this is why it's so important to really look at it. They can get upset with minor changes. They get really obsessed with an interest. They have to follow certain routines. They may flap their hands or rock their bodies or spin themselves to kind of soothe themselves. They have unusual reactions to the way things smell, sound, taste, feel, through the sensations. So again, we could do a whole lecture on autism. It really is a very complex developmental condition. We call it really a disorder of relating. And so again, it's important to also see the strengths of the kids. And I have a lot of friends whose kids are autistic, and they're really lovely kids as well. There's this skill called executive function. It's a funny name. But another thing that we look for is that ability to control your behavior, to pay attention to learning, and to developing thinking skills like attention, memory, attaining goals, and monitoring the flow of information and problem solving. It's almost like thinking about the air traffic control tower, right? There's a part of our brain in the front part of our brain called the frontal cortex that helps us to be able to kind of manage all that information so that we can reach our goals. And what's important with executive function is the ability to regulate ourselves, or to be able to take information in from our environment and tune out what's not useful. And that is always going to be impacted by our level of stress and how excited we are. It really is critical in our self-control and our ability to form relationships. And it's funny, I started working with a lot of child psychiatrists, and they use the word arousal. And what they were really trying to say is that for some folks, when they get overstimulated, they get like really alert and they get kind of flooded by their emotions. And for some people, when things are overwhelming, they get less alert. They get kind of sleepy and drowsy. It's called dissociation. So there's activation and dissociation, and we do it all the time. Even as I've been talking, there's times that you've been able to pay attention, but there's times that you fade out. And it's interesting because that connect and then go back, connect and disconnect has been happening to us even since we were in our mother's wombs, right? The mom's heartbeat comes and goes, comes and goes. So there's a rhythm to life. And so this piece of of where we are in our kind of our awakeness, our calmness is important for like how do we learn, right? So we learn when we're calm, alert, and present. And so that's that stage in between that, right? So that comes from this ability to self-regulate, and it allows kids and adults to manage their emotions and behaviors and their body movements when they're faced with a situation that's tough to handle. It allows them to do it while still staying focused and paying attention. This is going to vary based on what things are happening in our lives. But one of the metaphors that I like to use for this is a car, right? So think about it with a car. When you're driving, you need to be able to use the accelerator to move faster, the brakes to slow down, but you have to pay attention to how the engine is. In fact, with little ones, we by 3, we can start using something called "How is your engine running?" And kids get this, like they can feel like, "Oh, my engine's running fast," right? And so, if you think about a car, you think about the engine, you think about the brakes, you think about the accelerator, but you also think what's in the gas tank. And you have the speedometer that helps you say what speed is going on, the gauges to know that all the fluids are there. You have tires that you're moving on, but those have to be in good condition. And so those are things like inside us that we have to look at. But when you're driving, you also need to consider the roads, the weather, and the traffic, right? So I like to think about that metaphor of self-regulation as, driving ourselves as as a car. Now, what's really interesting with babies is babies can regulate themselves. They're having so much brain going on, um, that they need an adult to externally regulate them, right? To slow them down, but sometimes to pick them up. For those of you who sometimes have had babies, sometimes babies are a little drowsy. You have to wake them up to get them to start eating. So again, babies need that external regulation, and that helps them start to develop their own ability to regulate. So if you think about it this way, the baby's kind of inside the child, like it needs the parent to help them. And then children will learn to self-regulate with parents at that piece of co-regulation, going back and forth. So I'm going to stop here before I talk a little bit about parent mental health, particularly postpartum depression, and just see if you have questions about this, because I know I covered a lot of material.
I'm taking a look at the Q&A feature. I don't see any questions or in the chat, but for participants, if you have any questions about the material, please feel free to either drop it into the chat, or you can also use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen.
Okay. I'm going to have time at the end for questions, so I want to make sure that your questions are answered. I usually like more interaction, but do have a lot of material. Okay, so let's think about postpartum depression. It's very common, and I think we just need to do a better job of identifying it. We use there's a variety of tools, the Edinburgh, the PH2 and the PH9. We're using this in our tools, in our programs. Parents' mental health is really important, and we actually do the screening on parents all the way through. We don't really stop at just this postpartum. But why is it so important? Postpartum depression affects attachment and infant mental health. And we see that there's a developmental delay because there's not that interaction with the parent. And we see increased health illnesses and injuries to children, later mental health and drug abuse. Treatment is highly effective for moms. And when we can treat the mom, the developmental delays go away. So this is why it's so important. It's something we can intervene on. Now, I don't want to get too far into this, but there is something known as postpartum psychosis. And we do have moms that actually have really, really severe mental illness at that time period. In our programs, because we do screen for postpartum depression, we have had situations where we've had to hospitalize mothers. And that becomes complex because we need to make sure the kids are taken care of, their partners are taken care of. But when we have been able to help mothers, there's really a great degree of relief that they feel, that somebody was there to help them. So again, it's a really important piece. Now, what's happened in the time since this has become more recognized, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, that last picture has Brooke Shields, who talked about her piece. And so again, when folks have these experiences, they bring them forward. It helps us feel less alone in this experience. And so this is a very common experience. I have a colleague who also talks about fathers getting depressed. And there's actually a number of times where when the mother is depressed, the father is depressed in the postpartum period. So it becomes really important to look at the whole family unit. And we're also seeing that there's a high level of anxiety. And anxiety has very similar impacts on development as depression. And so this area of postpartum disorders of mood are really important. So depression and anxiety are very common. And, right now, as a society, we've been facing a lot of stressors with COVID, school shootings, political unrest, wars. There's a lot of anxiety in our society. So it becomes really important to support parents. So again, one of the reasons why I want to take a break is I'm going to move into some of the things that I'm talking about more and more these days. What I'm really interested in is how do these areas of the developing mind how do we best help our children? And again, with everything that we do, we usually try to make things a little bit more understandable and breaking them down to parts. So the way that I talked about development at the beginning, it looks like they're all separate pieces, but the truth of the matter is they're all interconnected. And I'm going to walk you through how I'm thinking about it now. And it really comes to this picture, which is really busy, but we'll break it down. And, the most basic thing that we are doing is trying to feel safe, right? So that's at the bottom of this picture. It's our survival state. It's, again, on Maslow's hierarchy, the very foundational, fundamental pieces as I'm safe. The next thing is on our emotional state is our question of, am I loved, right? Then our executive state, as I was saying, there's that part of our brain that helps us decide what to do and not to do. And it really is that part of asking, what can I learn from this situation or this moment? The other part that comes up is with our physical, our emotional, our mental, and our social development. It's all around our sense of self of like, who am I? Like, what are my beliefs? And so as we move further up and kind of outside of our own individual bodies, we really are looking at our social and our relational development, our connection to others. And the question really becomes, who are my family and who are my friends, right? Then there's this element of our interrelatedness, our pro-social, feeling the needs of others. You've heard me talk a lot about emotions in those pieces. But when we get to that level of development, we're really starting to think about who can I help and how can I make the world better? Now, my belief is that all of you who are on this call are in that level of development of wondering, how can I help and how can I make the world better? You take the time to be here to learn about this, to better serve families. That's what makes me think you're in this group of individuals. Now, the interesting part is that with this, how we're doing, as I keep mentioning, really does depend on our physical states. It really depends on, am I tired? Am I sleepy? Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Right? Now, I use the brain, and again, like I said, we sometimes just put a part up there, but we're more complex than that. So actually, the energy and information that we get really is coming from our body, our entire physical body, our gut, our GI system, our gastrointestinal system has almost as many nerves as we do have in our, or neural cells as we have in our brains. Likewise, the heart has a high concentration of nervous cells or neural cells. So our hearts, our bodies, and our brains really give us a lot of information. And so how does that look? So, I've used that term internal world. So just take a moment and reflect on the fact that within you, you have thoughts, right? We're accustomed to speaking and thinking, and that's how we know our thoughts. But we also have emotions and sensations. And our physical sensations, hearing, seeing, touching, smell, proprioception, where we are in the world, interoception, how our inner body feels, give us a lot of information, just like our emotions do. For example, I know for myself, I had a hard time with anger because I grew up and my father had some anger outbursts. And so I was always a little sensitive to anger. But now I've come to learn that anger is an important emotion. It tells us sometimes that we need to take action, we're not feeling safe, or we need a boundary. But I've learned that over time. But these things are going on inside of us and they help us create beliefs, right? So just reflect for a moment that you have in this moment thoughts, sensations, and emotions happening that are connected to your beliefs, and they're always kind of moving around right within us. And we talk a lot about I talked a lot about that idea of the interaction between parents and children. And there's so much that happens between parent and child that's nonverbal, right? So think about it. Your child has their thoughts, sensations, emotions, and beliefs developing, and it goes back and forth, right? And this happens when we're talking with one another. Even as I'm talking with you, even though we're not in the same physical space, there's an exchange of these pieces. And remember how I mentioned with babies, they don't have thoughts yet, right? They have emotions and sensations. And that's why these early years are so important. That's why the safety, the responding to needs is so important, right? When we do that, the baby really has an opportunity to interact with the world in a different way. So this is why not only do I teach this stuff, not only do I run programs, but I advocate for things around how do we best support parents and babies, parents and young children. So as I mentioned before, with these levels of development, to me, they're not lined up like I had in a hierarchy. They're actually interrelated and they're all mediated through our sense of self. And so, for example, who we are physically, we get feedback, right? So I always tell this funny story about when I was going from middle school to high school, I wanted to play football. My older brother was really a star football player. He was playing varsity as a sophomore, and I wanted to be like my brother. And my dad sat me down and said, "I'm not going to sign the paper to let you play. You're not that good at it." And he was right. My brother was physically an athlete. I'm not. He said, develop something else that you're really good at. He said, you're really great at speaking and debating. Do the debate team. And so I coached Pee Wee League football. So I kept my love of football where I could use my intelligence. And I started to do speaking. And so here I am today speaking. So it was good advice, but my sense of self is I'm good at speaking. I'm good at stuff around information. I don't have that same view about myself physically, right? So that affects my sense of self, right? So as we think about these things, our sense of self is really influenced by these other pieces. But you can see all of this development is interrelated. So as I start teaching development these days, these are the things that I want to get across is all this is interrelated. And then we break down those boxes and we really think about the bottom one there with the physical, like the gross motor, the fine motor, the proprioception and interoception are newer things that we understand about the physical body, like knowing where you are in the world physically. Proprioception is really important. And for some kids, what helps them, like little ones, is you say, "Oh, you're really upset. Why don't you push against the wall?" So they'll push against the wall, but they are activating these receptors in the body that help them locate where they're at. So really helpful. Interoception is understanding what's happening in our body, like our organs and things like that. So again, this field is constantly evolving. We've talked a lot about emotions and really understanding, recognizing, and regulating your emotions. That's part of our development. Mentally, it's our ability to think, cognition, to concentrate, to problem solve, to communicate. Communication connects with the physical, our imagination, our memory. That sense of self really has to do with my ability to do things, for me to know who I am, my identity, my ability to be good at stuff, mastery, morality, the idea of what's good and bad. And then in our social relationships, we've talked about attachment, temperament, attunement, interactions and relationship. And then on prosocial, the ideas of caring, empathy, compassion, and service. And again, development happens in the context of relationship, play, regulation, co-regulation. Co-regulation is that process as a parent where you help your child calm down, connect with their emotions. It really is just a beautiful process where kids get elevated and you help them calm down. And there's teaching and modeling that goes with this. So that's really what I'm teaching these days is that element of development. And the way that I look at it is, if you look at this, the everything begins and ends with our connection. Everything happens with that heart in the middle, right? And as we're growing and we're trying new things, we need those challenges to grow. But when we get overwhelmed, we need the comfort. So if you look straight across the middle, that's our the core of our relationships, especially with those who we nurture. We're encouraging them to grow, encouraging them to challenge themselves. You can do it, you can go a little further, but when they're overwhelmed, they come to us and say, we need we need that comforting. Now it's funny, I'm very, very lucky in my career. I'm at a point where when we had our one of our meetings recently, about 18 people came up to me and said, thank you for mentoring me. And I don't really think of myself as mentoring. I think of myself as nurturing them. And it really is very wonderful as an adult to be able to see other adults feel that I help them with challenges and I help them with their growth. And when they get overwhelmed, they feel that level of comfort so that they can be stronger. But it all starts with connection. So there's relationship, and then there's this piece of regulation and co-regulation. And what is that really about? Is we're getting information coming in. Often it's through our curiosity that we're letting information in. But there's also outflow of energy and information. And that can be thought of as our creativity, how we express ourselves. And it's really interesting because if you think about it, we're living in an age now where there's so much information that we have to learn how to manage the inflow of information. There's more information on our little phones than, we're exposed to more information in a week than most people were in an entire lifetime. So we have to learn how to do that and teach our kids how to do that. So if you think about it, really, all of this development really comes down to the development that really is part of this piece of our relationships and our ability to regulate. I would add one other piece, which is making sense of things and being able to tell a story that makes sense, right? So we have these experiences. And again, when you tell stories, you're interacting with somebody else. When you're telling stories, you're using your thoughts, your emotions, and your sensations. The reason we like certain actors and actresses is they can convey that and we can feel that. But think about it. All the time, we're telling our stories about ourselves and what our lives are like. And that's one of the things we need to work with children is to help them make sense of the situations. And with that, we can make a big difference in the way that our children grow and how we grow as parents. And I always like to tell people I have a 31-year-old, 25-year-old, and 23-year-old. And while the relationship is different because they're adults, I'm still learning and growing with them. I'm still at times challenged with what they bring. I have shared with my wife that the way that you best help adult children is meeting them where they are and then helping extend their thinking. And you don't tell them and you don't share your experiences all the time, but you ask them questions in a way that allows them to expand their ability in the world. And you join them in their thinking and help them take it a little further just by asking questions. But that really includes us being able to regulate ourselves and to be present with our kids, no matter what their age is. Just one quick story before I do the summary. I have a really dear friend of mine who is in a completely different field, and we went out for happy hour and we were talking, and he said, "Can I just ask you something? I have a 12-year-old and I'm having such a hard time, blah, blah, with him." So we talked and spent quite a bit of time with him. And I said, well, think about it this way, think about it that way. Why don't you take a look at this book? Some of Dan Siegel's work, one of the folks I mentioned earlier. And I said, he's 12 now, so you really want to be interacting with him and think of yourself more as a coach. And how can you coach him? Because he's developed certain skills and he is a very bright kid. Well, the next time I saw him, he said, "Hey, by the way, that talk we had, I completely changed how I parent. I'm not trying to discipline him in the way that I used to. I'm not telling him what to do. I'm talking with him. We're engaging in a different way. He said, my son even said to me, Dad, whatever you're doing now as a parent, thanks. It's a lot better. And so they have a great relationship. Now, again, the be all end all wasn't there. It was a really great story, followed with, and then he's doing this now, and I feel completely incompetent. And I told him that's parenting, right? As soon as you feel like you got it figured out, your kids change and you have to refigure it out. And so it's a good laugh. And I always tease him that, that's why he should pay for happy hour, because he's getting free advice. So that's one of my running jokes. So just to sum up everything, a child is born with the capacity to learn. The quality of a child's relationships with caretakers nurture that capacity. With secure attachment, quality emotional regulation, supportive environments, each generation can surpass the previous in our learning and our development. And I really do believe that. I really am optimistic. And even with the world as it is today, I really do feel strongly that we have this opportunity to support and nurture our children and to support and nurture one another in a way that really changes things. So we've got about 12 minutes left. So I really do want to open up for questions. I do want to hear your thoughts. I do want to hear your questions. And I realize I have to talk to Jessica about maybe doing a whole thing on regulation and co-regulation as a teaching. So thank you. I'll open up for questions.
So I'll remind folks you have a couple options on how to ask your questions. You can either enter them into the Q&A feature, or you could raise your hand and we can bring you off of mute as well. We'll give you a moment to think through that.
Which I love too. I love hearing people's questions. That and I don't type as fast.
I'm just keeping an eye on the chat. Someone says the subject would be great about regulation and self-regulation.
The other part too is you can also just share something that really stood out for you, or something that you learned, or something that got you to think, because again, that just gives us the opportunity. And if there are no questions or anything else, I can go to the next slide.
Yep. Wonderful. So, we just want to say on behalf of Caltrin, and of course on behalf of the, there's just one quick little note.
Yes.
Yes. So it's not a public note, so I'll make it, everyone knows. Going back to the older kids talking like babies, I've noticed in a lot of kids that they are newly big siblings.
Yes.
Any resources in California for maternal psychosis or father depression?
So for maternal psychosis, you really do need to get them to an emergency room, and that's going to vary from county to county. I think there's a better understanding of it, but that is really, really significant and really needs to be addressed immediately. So that's a go to the emergency room kind of a piece. Anecdotally, what I have found is often when a mother has that kind of psychosis, there's some unresolved traumas in their lives from earlier that come out. So again, it really does need a high level of mental health care. For father's depression, I will try to get you some resources as a follow-up to this. There are some great resources out there. Postpartum International is an amazing organization that trains providers, but it has some resources for parents, and I think has a warm line as well. So if you just look up Postpartum Depression International, it's really a great organization. And my colleague who I mentioned, actually, it's pretty funny. He's bilingual. He's from Texas, but he's bilingual. His name's Danny Singley. He looks like your accountant, but he's amazing, and he does his trainings in English and Spanish.
Let's see. We might have one other question. Question in the chat: how can we support parents that are having a challenging time coping with children's delays and or diagnosis?
I think so. Again, everything's very individualized, right? So you really want to explore with them what are they having a hard time with, what what is causing them concern. For many parents, if your kids aren't quote unquote normal, you had these expectations of what things were going to be like. I think I would share with people before I was a parent, I had some ideas of what parenting was like. After I was a parent, things were very different, right? So you really want to see what their hopes and dreams are, what their concerns are. Are they worried about their child's future? Are they worried about what's happening right now? Um, are they able to accept it? Um, and again, with the individual child, what are things that can help, right? You want to give them a sense of hope that their future can be better than their today. And it's important to get them to the right resources with the right folks. That's why I brought up all these different ways to connect. And in that time period, while they're connecting, two things are that helps families is helping them with things that they can actually do for their child. And the other part is helping the parents with their stress. Those are things that we can concretely help with, and getting them connected. So that's my quick answer.
Great, thank you. I am not seeing any additional questions in the chat or in the Q&A feature. So with that, we will conclude.
Okay.
And just thank you so much for your time, your expertise. I'm sure you'll get a lot of thank yous. I would say the best thank you is an emoji. So
Oh,
you could
sorry.
definitely drop an emoji to say your thanks. In the meantime, I'm going to put the survey in the chat. That survey will give you access to the certificate of attendance once you have completed it. And as a reminder, we will be sending a copy of the resources and the recording to your registration email in the next few days.
Sorry,
So with
I'm making a mess with the slides. Sorry.
that,
We get to the last slide.
I wish I was a speed reader. This would be great.
Oops. There we are. Sorry.
Wonderful. And so that survey and certificate, it is in the chat now. The email and the resources will be sent to you in the next couple days. And of course, keep an eye on your inbox for future trainings that are coming out through Caltrim. Thank you all so much and have a great weekend.
Bye-bye, everybody.